Lev and Jules are printing and designing custom shirts. And this one is of Karl Popper, one of the most influential philosophers of the 20th century. We've made over 100 shirts, and we could print or design anything. Got a shirt in mind? Just email us and we'll print it for you. Want a custom design? We'll make one for you. And we'll deliver it directly to your door. Not to you. We don't even want to see you. We can just hide somewhere, make sure you get the package, and then we'll be on our way.
Welcome back. We've got our next episode of Sewing Discourse. We're joined by Gray Scott. He is one of my mentors and major inspirations that I feel sort of incepted even the beginning of this show. Gray, I'm not sure if you remember this. I think you were a photographer for me on a photo shoot. I think we did a photo shoot together. I was a model, like just starting, Surface Magazine. It was years later. I had watched the Ray Kurzweil documentary. I found your blog.
Yeah.
And I invited you to the Futurist sessions.
Oh yeah.
And then that sort of started everything. I worked with you a little bit. I helped with a little bit of research and stuff. That was awesome.
Part of what Jules was helping me with was research for a book that I'm still currently writing. So that actually went on for quite a while. And there would be days where you would come over and I would literally just read you chapter and have you read it back to me just to see if what I was talking about actually made sense. What I'm really circling around right now is this idea of digital reflections. And I think some of the chapters that we worked on together, you probably are familiar with what I'm talking about. And it's just the idea that for some reason, from the beginning of time, our species has been obsessed with reflection. And even since you and I worked together, I have really gone down that rabbit hole of trying to figure out why and what the major events were that we experienced throughout history. And as I was preparing for my speech at NASA that happened a couple of months ago, the name of that speech was based off of a cover story by Kevin Kelly for Wired Magazine called Mirror World. And when I started researching this idea of mirror world, which is the way that Kevin Kelly is talking about mirror world, it is the next iteration of the internet. So it's the virtual simulated world, the three-dimensional world the augmented world that we will turn into the new internet. So in the future, when we do an interview together, it's not going to be face to face on a flat 2D screen. It's going to be the three of us in a room, and we'll be able to look at the environment. We'll be able to see what the table looks like. If I want to get up and walk around, I'll get up and walk around. So, and it doesn't have to be stagnant. In that future, in the mirror world, in the augmented space that's going to be the next internet, we don't have to be stagnant. We could actually go on a trip together and have this conversation. So
would it be correct to say it's close to a dream state, where in a dream state you could be one place 1 second, and then the other second you could be in a completely different location, maybe flying or doing whatever it is you want, and it would be much more real than whatever virtual reality exists today?
Yes, I mean, part of what is happening slowly, and this has to do with the reflection and the digital reflection that I've been talking about. What's happened is, when we emerged as a conscious species, the first encounter that we had with consciousness, or the development of consciousness, even though no one could prove this, there's no one that can actually prove that this is true, but this is an assumption, this is a theory, and I'm not the only one that has this. There came a time in our development as a species where we noticed that there was a primate looking up at us when we would go to the riverbank. There was a primate looking up at us when we would hold a carved wooden bowl with water in it, or a black pot with water in it, right? So any sort of watery, still reflective surface was the first encounter with ourselves, with our own reflection. And that was transient, because if the water was moving, you didn't get a clear vision of what that was. If the pot, if the water wasn't still when you were holding the pot, the vision wasn't clear as to what you were seeing. I think that was the first and the beginning stage, that with the psychedelics that primates were coming in contact with. That's a Terence McKenna reference for
Stoned ape theory.
exactly. So I think Terence didn't talk about this. And I've listened to almost everything I get my hands on, every recording he ever made, and I have never heard him really talk about the effect that the mirror had. And when I say mirror, I'm assuming that is the first incarnation of the technology we call mirror, because mirrors are technology. It's something that we manifested, or nature manifested. So I think that was probably that combination of being hyped up on psychedelics, psilocybin mushrooms, that combined with seeing ourselves for the first time over and over again until we realized that it was actually us, and whatever stages that took psychologically, it probably was very complex. That was the first stage. If you move through time, then what happens is that you have polished bronze, polished copper. Again, not a very clear image, still not hyper realistic, but you do get a sense that there is a person in that reflection. So that happened in Greece, ancient Greece, and Egyptian ancient antiquity. That had a profound effect. As you can see, if you've ever been to Egypt, you can see the effect that probably had. It was a clearer version of consciousness, and probably the next stage for us to realize who and what we were. Then you get to the early 1300s, where the modern mirror starts to emerge. It's not perfect, but it's actually much clearer than the polished bronze. And weird, strange sort of cultural things start happening in these epochs. You have portraiture in art becomes prevalent. You have, instead of living as a community, you have hierarchy of living, and privacy starts to emerge. And I think a lot of this had to do with when we realized how the world was seeing us clearly, through the technology of the mirror. I mean, you can imagine there are multiple effects, right? One is shame, one is envy, one could be repulsion, right? You if you've never seen yourself and then you see yourself for the very first time, I mean, imagine what that could be like if you're either considered ugly or considered beautiful. And we have to also factor in the fact that culturally, beauty has changed over time. So what's beautiful now is not necessarily beautiful then. So it had all these really profound effects. And then we get to the 1800s, where mirrors become common throughout the world. And then you start to see really the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. You start to see, I mean, so I'm not saying that these have one-to-one correlations, but what I am saying is that anytime that a technology is developed, there is a cultural response to that technology. It affects us psychologically, it affects us physiologically, it affects us the way that we see ourselves and the way that we see the world. And to take this even further into the future, NASA is about to launch the James Webb Telescope, which may show us the first light of the cosmos. That is a profound idea that this device, the mirror, has from the beginning of time maybe even given us consciousness, to the fact that we're moving towards a future where it may show us our very essence, our very beginnings.
We're always worried about the AI becoming self-aware, a la Skynet. Mm-hmm. Okay, we are the AI. And we're about to become self-aware if we can figure out what our own source code is. So we are Skynet.
So you're talking about the source code of reality itself.
Yep.
So anyway, I'm sort of tying that in with the digital mirror, which is what we're working with right now as we make this recording. And you can see, because you guys grew up in this age, I spent half of my life with the internet and half without so far. And you can see that the digital mirror has had a profound effect on us. We don't even really know what it is yet. So in 30 years, we'll circle back to this conversation and I'll be able to tell you, these are the effects that the digital mirror had on us.
Could you tie it to the development of the human ego, the development of the
Oh,
mirrors?
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and that's what, I mean, and Jules, you can speak to this directly. I think you and I had multiple conversations about image, especially for me, because I realized pretty quickly when I entered this field as a futurist that no one was taking the image of a futurist and really extrapolating that and toying with it. I hate to say it that way, but that's really what I was trying to do, and I'm still trying to do. That I could try to represent something visually that was important and not just academically important. I mean, I think Jules and I had multiple conversations about people misunderstanding what I was doing. And what I've realized now through the research on the mirror itself is that it's the effect of the digital mirror phase that we're going through that causes people to have this overreaction to people's image, if that makes sense. And they overreact. We are overreacting culturally with our image and our ego. All you have to do is look at Dazed and Confused or Vice. There's a couple of other digital fashion magazines, but all you have to do is look at those as a reference to how dramatic people have made themselves look now. I mean, it's not uncommon for someone to have a purple beard. It's not uncommon now for people to have green hair and reptilian eyes through contact lenses. It's not uncommon now for people to have prosthetics that they walk around with all the time. Some of that is cosmetic and some of it is, the grinder community where people are implanting things into their body. So I think
it's
you're
also
right.
the transhuman. It's not just the grinder community. I imagine it's body modification. It's like body art.
Yeah.
It's like it started. I saw in the Smithsonian they were talking about how tattoo culture came from. I think it was like Australia, prison culture, and then it became more adopted by artists and like nomadics, sailors. And now it's common for people, they're getting tattoos on their faces even. And it's not even necessarily a career killer, although it seems like a really reckless thing to do to get a tattoo on your face like that. But, I've seen some very tasteful face tattoos. I'm not going to lie, but
Well, it's the permanence is what I'm not really attracted to. I mean, you can ask any of my friends or any of my family members. They always, every time they see me, they're like, "You look different every time I see you," and it's because I get bored really easy. It's been very hard for me to maintain my image for the last 7 years. Just for branding consistency, it's been really hard for me to do that because I typically would change my hair like every couple of months just because I get bored. I like the transient morphological sort of freedom that you have with the technologies that we have. I mean, the beauty industry has come a long way. There are things that you can do to your body now. And we're not just talking about cosmetics. I'm talking about semi-permanent tattoos, electronic tattoos, prosthetic devices that you can wear for a couple of weeks, electronic makeup. I mean, there's all these weird, fascinating things that you can experiment with your image. And I think the reason that there's this rise in the cosmetic industry and just the rise in ego too, going back to your point, is that we are constantly seeing ourselves. You have a you literally have a black mirror.
A monolith.
You have a monolith that you're scratching on all the time. So we really are in 2001. We're just at the beginning, I guess. But going back to this ego thing, and I think this is what Jules and I had talked about. There's a difference between the surface, which is narcissism, and the deeper version of being interested in the self. When you start talking about quantified self and things like that, the digital mirror and the experience that we're having right now, and it's very extreme, as the two of you know, you can add a filter now to make yourself look any way that you want to, and it's only going to keep increasing. So the ego has been sort of stretched for good or ill. It has been stretched in multiple different ways, in multiple different directions. So it's made us much more cynical about the way that people look. It's made us less, it's made us more experimental, which is good. It's made us less judgmental about people's appearance, which is great. I'm a little concerned about what it's done to us internally. You have to be very careful with it. I mean, I'm a very secure person. I don't, it takes a lot to rattle me now. I think when you do the kind of work that I'm doing, because I have to get up in front of people and I have to go on television all the time, you have to just be very secure with yourself, because people will, even unintentionally, people will wreck you if you're not secure with who you are. And I don't need any of this. If I take pictures of myself and make myself look a certain way, I'm doing it because I think it's fun and I like it, and I am looking for a reaction from people, because I'm trying to pierce the cultural bubble with futurism, and that's very hard to do in the age of the Kardashians. It's very hard to do in the age where everyone is so cynical that they're not taking the future seriously, and we should be. So I'm just fascinated, and I guess this is just because I have a history of making imagery, as a photographer. When you are in that world and when you're looking at people what I found that, let me put it this way. What I found through my experience of photography that I did not like, what happened to me, was that I started, at a certain point, there was a switch, and I started seeing these models as objects instead of humans. And that was close to the point where I left, because, you're dealing with agents, you're dealing with hundreds of thousands of dollars for a one-day shoot, and you're under the pressure to make these people look amazing. And I learned a lot from that, and I'm using what I learned from that experience as a photographer in a field that is notoriously academic and notoriously insular. Futurism and futurists and foresight experts, or however you want to describe it, have spent way too long being insulated from the rest of the world. And we need people, and it can't just be me, because I can't do it all, and plus not everyone's gonna like me. So there have to be other people that are going out and putting themselves at risk, truly putting their reputations at risk by sticking their necks out and getting their faces in the media.
I think culturally, at least when I was growing up, there was sort of you could call it cynicism towards confidence, or like people would go, oh, that person loves the way they look so much, it must be arrogance. Sometimes people, I find, are just like sometimes dealing with their own demons, and they don't like the way you make their demons feel. Right?
Oh yeah.
And so then they'll try to either just like cut you down or look for chinks in your armor.
Again, going back to the digital mirror, the first thing that any application asks you for is your image. Think about that, the effect that has on our culture, where it used to be maybe 1% of our our human culture was working in a field where their appearance was important. Now it's millions, if not billions, of people. Their appearance is a part of their work. I mean, if they're on Instagram, if it has become much more crystallized around us. And so I guess what I'm saying is that because the technology is reflective, right? There's a camera in every phone, in every laptop, there are cameras everywhere now. I guess what I'm saying is that the future has put much more pressure on us to be seen and to see ourselves. And this is why, I think my most recognized quote is, "The future is a portal inward." And that was how that statement began. The future is a portal inward. And I actually have extended that statement to be, the future is a portal inward, and what we find there will be computational and ancient. And that came from looking at this lineage of technology and how it's changed over time and how it's changing us. We're not becoming more remote to ourselves, even though on the surface you would think that the future has made us, as we've moved into the future, we've become more vacuous. I think that sense of shallow introspection has always been there. It's just that you're seeing more of it now because the cameras are everywhere. It's not the dysfunction that's new, it's the cameras that are new.
The other image that's also been very fascinating to me is how, let's say on Twitter, users would sometimes choose certain anime avatars to represent themselves.
Yeah.
And how that is, in a way, another mirror, an animated mirror, as far as, let's say, how the Japanese people view society and culture and philosophy. They represent it in these very beautiful stylistic images. So I could definitely see why people are attracted to that.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm also noticing another interesting phase, to touch on what you were talking about before, relating to this tendency of seeing models not as human beings, but as these pieces, where there is this design critic named Eli Schiff, who has a Twitter account he runs called Humans of Flat Design, where he breaks down all of these, and you've probably seen them everywhere by now. They're on different tech platforms, including Facebook. All these strange looking murals of these flat people with these tiny heads and these big arms and legs. And his point is that this kind of weird art style has become very dehumanizing, that it's not really focused on the subtleties of certain expressions and conveying the spirit of the drawing, but is just turning people into these things that are just these soulless pieces of goo or whatever. I don't really know the right way to describe it.
The art, sorry.
Yeah, no, well, I don't know. It's like, what do you make of something like that? And I'd wish that there would be a graphic design reaction to that.
The art that I saw it as sort of similar to the feelings I get from brutalism, that those like concrete angular buildings with like no decoration or anything. And I think this is something philosophers have been working on forever, and still today, the effect of aesthetics on spirit. Like you can walk into a certain building and it can uplift your soul. Right. One of my favorite quotes on having a messy apartment is like, having a messy apartment is like microdosing depression. Do you know what I mean? As in, it's right. So
no, it's absolutely true. And I'm a fan of the brutalist architecture movement. I loved that in Blade Runner, the 2049, they used the brutalist architecture as a space for the most evil oligarch that the world will ever see. And it was effective. I mean, you felt small in those scenes. You felt like there was this oppressive. I like it. I like brutalism for its effect. See, I like things, and this goes for technologies as well. I like things that are emotionally effective, if that makes sense. A lot of design, especially postmodern design, for me is not effective. It's messy. and it's casual, if that makes sense. It's too casual for me. I need strong, brutal. That's why I love The Handmaids. It's like you have a desaturated film with like these blotches of like blood red females that are like fighting for their lives and getting raped, and like, and I love it. I mean, it's to me, it's like, you know, the main character in Handmaid's Tale, Offred, she is a badass. I mean, she visually, not just like her character, she the way that red body moves through that desaturated brutalist space is so effective for the soul, for your emotional triggers, for your internal dialogue. There's something about that, and I think that goes back to our primal state of searching, hunting, and gathering. You know, red is you see red in an instant because it means food or predator, or attack. So it's funny that you bring up architecture, because I mean, I'm sort of obsessed with architecture too. The future of architecture, the way that futurists like Buckminster Fuller also understood the effect of buildings. But, you know, to move this conversation a little bit more towards the sort of techie end, the reason that I think that this is all happening to us, because you have to, as a techno-philosopher, because that is sort of my main field. I'm a futurist, but I'm also a techno-philosopher. You have to ask yourself why these technologies are happening. Because if they weren't effective the way that we just described, there wouldn't be an uptake. There wouldn't be, culture would just ignore it, and it would fade away. And we've seen lots of technologies that have done that, either because the aesthetics were wrong, or because it wasn't effective the way that we were just talking about. So, what I think is happening, and what's going to continue to happen, is that as as the focus of those cameras becomes more densely concentrated, as they become more densely hyper realistic, that is going to give us even more information about who and what we are. So it's not that we're moving away from the self or the internal dialogue. We're actually moving deeper into the self. That's why I keep saying that the future is a portal inward. And people have said, well, what are the tangible ways that you're describing this? The most tangible way to describe this is medicine. I mean, look at medicine and even technology in medicine, how it's developed. We know more about the brain than we ever have. And we're on the cusp of recording memories. In fact, we have recorded memories. We're on the cusp of recording dreams. We're on the cusp of possibly understanding the origin of consciousness, how consciousness works, how to inhabit someone else's consciousness, all through brain-computer interface systems and brain implants. And that all of that stuff is coming very, very quickly. I think, going back to your original point about the response to bad design or flat design that is soulless, that is the response. The response is that we are the art of the future, if that makes sense. And I that has been on the back of my mind since the first day I started taking pictures, that the canvas is no longer out there. The canvas is inside. We are taking a journey towards that internal landscape. And that internal landscape is to be painted. It is to be seen. It is to be shared. It is to, all of that is where we're headed in the near future. And this is not esoteric. This is, I mean, this is tangible. Mm-hmm. To break it down for people who are watching this, what I'm saying tangibly is, and how this will unfold is that, it will start with virtual reality glasses and augmented glasses, where there's sort of a not so great overlay in the real world. That's version 1. Version 2 will be, okay, the overlay is much better. It's almost undetectable, but you still know it's there. And then the third level is undetectable. So if if you and I are wearing our augmented glasses in the future and we come in contact with each other, and I have set my parameter to look a certain way, I can send that to the system on your glasses, and you will never see me the way I really am. You will see me the way I want you to see me. That's the future we're headed towards. And that says, first, what does that say about me? Does it say that I don't want to be seen? That's an interesting thing. Do I want to be forgotten? Maybe I want to be seen in a specific way, and it may not be necessarily flattering. I mean, a lot of the way that people are altering their image right now, it's actually not flattering. It's interesting, but it's not flattering. And I think that has Black Mirror touched on a lot of these issues, and their focus on the image sort of came up in the simulation episode, where the 2 girls were inside of the simulation. You don't realize that they're inside of the simulation until later. Mm-hmm. But they chose younger bodies. They represented themselves in the simulation as young women. So I think, the near future is a future where we are the art. We are the canvas, and the internal language that we try to present to the world gets expressed externally, if that makes sense.
It's weird to imagine that people could be making new life forms as if it's art. So with CRISPR, now we have rough abilities of working with DNA, but I wonder what it will be like as governments and scientists make new chimera creatures, and then you can start customizing those things and creating animals that have never existed.
Centaurs.
And centaurs, yeah. These are the things that I wonder, and you probably have a lot more experience with this than I do, but are there specific ideas that you find more rejection to than others? Are there certain things that I feel a lot of this stuff has been percolating for so long that people they're kind of used to the conversation. It's not as shocking to people because they've seen it on television, or they've seen it in a Netflix show, or they've seen it in a music video, or whatever it is. I mean, this is the time for now is very interested in where the robot's taken us, what's happening with the internet, what's happening with the future of medicine. Mm-hmm. And
yeah, we've not reached peak future yet. That this is something I've been talking about. We've sort of just cracked the cultural egg, so to speak. I mean, we have literally just made a fracture in the psyche of culture. The way that Terence McKenna and Alan Watts, I would say, cracked that cultural narrative in their time period, talking about the subject that they were talking about. It took a long time for them to break through. 10 years was probably what it took for them to really break through so that the culture, the mainstream culture was sort of hearing those names, and figuring out that something was going on. I don't think and when I say we, I mean futurists. I don't think futurists have hit peak future yet. I don't think that we have had that really big moment quite yet. There have been some little things that have happened, and I think we've influenced a lot of television and a lot of content. I know for a fact, because I'll be listening or watching a movie, and I know that that's something that I wrote. That's happened many times. And actually I tweeted about it once, and the producer got back to me. because I know my work. I know when I've said something specifically when it comes up. So we're not at the crest yet. So there's still an opportunity for us to craft our message as futurists. And there's still a lot of controversy in the field. I mean, there's still people that don't like the word futurist. There are foresight experts who want to, they're afraid to not be taken seriously economically. They're afraid economically. I'm very, very fortunate that I don't have to worry about that. And because of that, I've taken risks that other futurists are not willing to take. I've said things and done things and appeared on shows that people that are academics wouldn't necessarily do, because I'm trying to reach the general public. I'm not interested in the corporations. I'm not interested in the academics of it. Those guys have had their hands around foresight for a very long time. The think tanks can take care of them. Okay. What I'm interested in is fostering younger futurists, because we need a younger generation. I'm interested in fostering those relationships and getting those younger futurists in a position where they are confident with their theories, they're confident with their voice, and they are going out and being effective, whether that's speaking on stage, whether that's starting a radio show, whether that's starting a show like what you guys have now, whether that's going on television, whatever it is. We need an abundance of younger futurists that are not afraid to be futurists, that are not afraid to be seen as wacky or crazy or whatever words they're going to throw at you. You can't be afraid of that. And that's one of my biggest messages to because I get a lot of emails from younger people that are like, how do I become a futurist? And I love what you're doing, and I want to figure out what role I can play in this field. And I always say that the field right now is pretty wide open, because everyone in the foresight industry is so obsessed with that next corporate account. I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in talking to the public.
Who are some of your favorite? Are there other futurists right now that you find inspiring or that you think are other good role models?
Yeah, so obviously Jason Silva is huge in a certain section of this world. He has a specific brand, and he is very easy. His entry point is very easy. He's not bizarre. He's a dude, if that makes sense. He has that sort of California laid back. He has that sort of philosopher, Esalen spirit. That's how I see him.
He spoke at the National Arts Club as well a couple of years ago. So I got to meet him there and have him as a guest. Great guy.
He has a very specific kind of way that he thinks about the future, and the way that he has sort of highlighted other futurists and thought leaders and philosophers. And that's been very successful for him, and it's been very successful for the movement. There's actually a couple of new younger, I can't remember his name, but he's an ambassador for Curiosity Stream. He used to be a NASA engineer, and he's now one of Curiosity Stream's ambassadors, and he's the science ambassador for them. And I like what he's doing. I mean, he's you know, every person has their own thing, their own vibe. He's very excited and animated, which Jason was a little bit of that too, or a lot of that actually. I'm not. I come from the Alan Watts, Terrence McKenna school. If you're too hyper, that energy, I don't like that energy. My energy is very
Zen.
I am from the Buddhist school of philosophy. So if you're too excited, or if I'm suspicious of that a little bit. And I think there has been some, there's that's the criticism that I think Jason has had, is it's a little over the top.
Did you ever see The Wire, the HBO show?
Yeah.
Do you remember there was that guy who was making a boxing gym, and he was trying to get people in the boxing gym, and he goes up to these guys, and someone's like, "Why are you so friendly?" They're like, "Why?" Like, they're because they were so not used to that vibe of like, and they're like, "Oh, this is like," and so they didn't trust him when he was literally just being like, "I'm making a gym, like come and hang out at the gym," like,
I agree.
Like, why is that dude friendly? Like,
I don't trust. I don't trust someone who's not friendly sometimes. Like, I'm definitely like I don't like people a lot of the time. So, I need my, and I think to really do honest, deep, introspective work for yourself, which is the most important thing, but also to do it for the world as a futurist, and to say, we have to look at everything. We can't just be optimistic. We can't be positive all the time. I can't start every video with a huge smile on my face. We have to go where the darkness is, as well as the light. And so, I don't know. Look, part of it is, as a philosopher, you spend a lot of your time depressing the hell out of yourself, because the world is so complex right now. We seem to be de-evolving, going more towards chaos, which is, I think, there's an intention behind what's happening right now. There's always a reason why things are happening. There's always some sort of vibratory thing that's happening in the universe, and you can point to it. And I've actually done a lot of research on why we are where we are right now. And I think some of that has to do with the fact that this age that we're going through is the last grasp that the power hungry, amygdala driven, monkey mind, fearful human beings that are running things, it's their last grasp of that power. They know it's slipping through their fingers. They know it because we are much more decentralized than we have ever been. We are much more empowered because we have the tools to make our own shows, have our own voices. We can go outside of their monetary system now. We can change our own DNA if we want to, our own genetic structure now. The power is in our hands, and it is freaking them out. I think it's going to get much more extreme, probably up to the line of nuclear annihilation. I don't know if we'll go over that line.
No.
We might go over the line accidentally, because we who knows if we can control ourselves.
While I don't have any evidence as far as whether there were, like Graham Hancock talks about, ancient civilizations that existed way before us, there is something that I like about Hindu cosmology, where they talk about the Kali Yuga, the Age of Darkness, leading into Satya Yuga, which is the Golden Age,
Yep.
and Satya means truth. So what you're talking about right now is also like a revelation. Like we had the book of Revelation. What is Revelation? What is Apocalypse? That's Revelation. It's the breaking of the veil.
What's interesting that you use that word veil. I'm working on a science fiction project right now, and that's the main character's name. And it's a woman. Her name is Veil Oris. And I don't want to tell you anything more than that, but it's just interesting because I'm using the word veil to represent what's happening to us right now, because the veil is being disintegrated, and this is just a layer to it. This has happened to us before, through all those epochs that I talked about before. I think that this next phase is going to be so frightening for some people. And for other people, I think it's going to be very freeing and empowering. But I don't think it's an economic structure that can be pointed to. I think it's per individual. So if you have spent your first 18 years of life being fearful and being judged and feeling inadequate and not beautiful or whatever. We could name 100 different things. You have the opportunity now to change that. You can change who you are. You can change where you live. You can, I mean, if you want to go live in Thailand and work as a coder and never set foot in the United States again, you can do that. If you want to change your face cosmetically, you can do that. If you want to experiment on your body now and implant devices into your body now, you can do that. So I think part of the reason why we're seeing such extreme behavior from is because that those power structures know that this is their last chance. You know, the oil companies know that it's over. And once people figure out that they can grow their own food through vertical farming and hydroponics, and, you know, are people really going to pay $10 for a bag of lettuce in the future? I mean, why would you, when you can grow it yourself? So it's just, you know, it's an age of chaos, but it's also an age of empowerment.
I was interested in how you're talking about this end of power, and you touched a little bit on like derangement or mental illness and how it might have always been there, and the technology is kind of hyper focusing it or highlighting it more, like putting it all under a spotlight.
Mm-hmm.
But also I've heard other ideas that a lot of this mental illness might have been manufactured accidentally through some negative feedback loops. As in Plato's Republic, he talks about role models and how if you wanted to design a society, you pick role models based on the types of behavior you want others to mimic.
Mm-hmm.
So I think mindlessly, like when we have all these gatekeepers in these industries now, whether it's like what shows we put on television, what musicians
Mm-hmm.
we put on stage, you know, what are they going to be singing about? You know, what are the conflicts going to look like on reality television?
Yep.
Right? What will they be celebrating? Will they be reciting poetry and
Mm-hmm.
prose from memory, or will they be talking about things that they really hate and dislike? And Will Smith was recently talking about how you can actually get addicted to hating. How like sometimes people, it's like a different kind of adrenaline rush or something where they want to snap at something, even if it's actually toxic for one's self. Some people see mentally ill people and think like, I think the mind used to be a lot more mysterious in terms of everyone thought in terms of like there was no neuroplasticity,
Mm-hmm.
in terms of the brain couldn't change itself. You get the hand you're dealt, and if you have one of these textbook mental illnesses, like that's going to define you. But I feel like a lot of that stuff is very similar to the way I consider astrology. Like a joke about astrology. I think astrology is like Christianity for gay people and stuff. Like that's like, but I think that these psychology pop books are like similar in terms of like you have a doctor in a lab coat say like this is your diagnosis,
Mm-hmm.
and then suddenly you take that narrative and you create that feedback loop, and then
Well,
with that next to these role models, I wonder how it has affected our cultural psychology. And I
yeah.
think now the technology is like either going to help us solve it, or it's going to also like in some instances throw it off the rails.
Well, I think every age that you experience, every age that comes into existence, there are technologies that just are too much for people to handle. This is a very specific age because these technologies are much more closely bound to our minds and bodies, if that makes sense. You used a word And it comes up, now that I've started thinking of the mirror as like my base platform of thinking, and reflection and digital reflection as my sort of way of looking at how the world is moving into the future. You start to hear these things all the time. You use the word mimic. We know that, at least in rats, that rats have mirror neurons in their brains. That has been proven. There's still some controversy about whether there are mirror neurons in the human brain, but more than likely we do have these mirror neurons. And what that means is that part of the way that we form our consciousness and part of the way that we form culture is by mimicking what we see. Now, you're absolutely right that the cultural psyche can be very damaged by being forced in a lot of ways to see over and over and over again malnourished emotional beings. These human beings that are being highlighted right now, and I'm not going to mention names, but everybody knows who they are. And it's not just in politics. It's not just in the celebrity circles. It's all over the world. It's people in every walk of life. These are, as I said, malnourished emotional beings who have somehow made their way to the top of their field. And a lot of that has to do with being shameless, not caring what other people experience and feel. That's a huge thing. I mean, these are sociopathic behaviors, basically. And we're being forced to engage with them visually. We're being forced to hear them all the time. And so that's why part of what I think is really important for futurists, and especially techno-philosophers, is to not be afraid to be serious. Don't be afraid to be earnest. Don't be afraid to be smart. Don't be afraid. And we live in a culture now where there's some people have a tendency to think there's something wrong with you if you think deeply. I don't even understand that. And yet I've spoken at conferences where I'm speaking the way I'm speaking to you now, very literal. I'm not being esoteric. People always ask me, how do you formulate your predictions? I don't really like the word predictions in general. All I'm doing is I like extrapolation. That to me is what I do. I don't think that anybody can truly predict the future. I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there are people. I don't think I can predict the future. You can't just sit me down and say what's going to happen in 2059. I mean, who the hell knows? The world could be destroyed before then. I don't know. But what I can do is give extrapolations based on what my observations are. And there's a futurist named Faith Popcorn, and she has said, and she's also said to me, that being a futurist is looking where other people are not looking, or looking where other people are afraid to look. And I think that's a lot of what people have to learn to do if you want to work in this field. Is you have to be very observant of your bias. You have to be very observant of what is really going on. What is the real story? I know pretty quickly if I see a movie that's trending, or if I see a celebrity that's trending saying a specific thing. I know very quickly that that is going to resonate through the culture because of the mirror neurons and the mimicry that we enact in our culture. So suddenly you'll start seeing teens saying these things that these celebrities or politicians have said, even if it's vile, even if it's horrible.
The face tattoos.
Oh
right?
yeah, same thing. Yeah, I mean, I remember. This is one of those horrible stories that I try to stay away from modern culture as much as I can, because I agree with Terrence McKenna. Culture is not your friend. It is toxic, and it will eat you alive if you are not careful, if you don't separate yourself from it. So Plus, I don't think you can do authentic work if you're too focused on that. You have to sort of separate yourself from it. But I remember there was this something that was trending on Twitter. It was this guy. He had been arrested, and it was a mugshot. I mean, yes, he had a beautiful face, and he had a little tear tattoo,
Hmm.
and he was trending because he was so attractive, right? And his mugshot was so attractive. This is why he was trending, not because he said something profound, but people thought he was hot. This is what it was, like, hot, hot. And you could just read the responses. My first reactions to this was obviously repulsion, because you don't even know what he did. Is this a serial rapist that is raping children? And they're like, oh, he's so hot, I want to get with him. And it's like, you don't even know what this human being has done. And that's what I'm saying about culture not being your friend. It is malnourished culture, and it's looking for nourishment. And so that's the thing I keep saying to people that we have to be afraid of in the future. We have to be very careful that as we're creating this mirror world, this simulated world, this virtual reality space that we're headed towards, that we don't become the nutrient. And that is my fear in this scenario. My extrapolation is that unintentionally, I think that's what's going to happen. It already sort of feels like that's what's happening now.
I feel milked by Facebook and Twitter a lot of the times. Like
It's
it's
perfect. Yeah.
right.
Well, I also feel really sorry for a lot of the kids who are growing up with YouTube, where there are these specific kid-friendly videos with all these horrible, really bright yellow, blue, and red colors everywhere. And I'm just thinking, like, if they were exposed to something like, I don't know, Spirited Away or My Neighbor Totoro,
Yeah.
or like
Yeah.
films with really good color design, how much of a difference that would make in their psyche. And then I think back to somebody like Nikola Tesla, who you were mentioning in your video,
Hmm.
someone who had the ability to, through his mind's eye, construct whatever it is he wanted to create. And one worry that I had, which I wanted to address here tonight, is if there's going to be this closed, well, maybe not closed, but if there's going to be this system where we're going to be outsourcing our ability to create to a lot of things that have already been put in place, like people putting various emojis in instead of whatever reactions they happen to have.
Yeah.
The fear that I get there is that how often are we going to be able to have people like Tesla come around that would use the power of their mind to get really deep inside rather than being able to outsource it to another device?
Or another person. Yeah. No.
Exactly.
No, I agree. That that fear of being, as Jules put it, milked. Um, I have nightmares about that. Literally, I wake up feeling um, sometimes like I'm being devoured, and I think it's because my attunement is focused on, and my intuition is focused on trying to sense the broader picture of what is being done to society. Because if I can do that, I can extrapolate from there. If I ignore the horrid, vacuous world that's being created for kids today, that's two-dimensional with like three colors, um, it doesn't bode well for the next generation as they move into a world that is not primary. It's, the world is very complex. You have to be able to navigate without getting your feelings hurt every 5 minutes. And I feel like we're numbing people.
Hmm.
The emoji is a perfect example of that. I use it rarely, but I do use them. And I always think I'm being lazy. I'm like, I don't feel like typing, so I'm just going to press this happy face, or I'm going to press the cha-cha dancer, or whatever the I use that cha-cha dancer a lot, actually. But it has forced me to think about why I'm using it. And sometimes it's because I want out of the conversation, honestly, or it's because I am am busy or I'm being interrupted. And so there are also layers to extrapolations, and you always have to be careful not to say, okay, emojis are bad, or emojis are making us dumber, or they're not useful. I mean, sometimes they are, and we've seen these things come up throughout history
I love
before.
emojis. I love
Um,
I'm a big believer. I'm a big emoji believer.
you're a big cha-cha emoji fan?
Well, Socrates
All
was
of the above.
bemoaning the invention of writing because,
Yeah.
according to him, people wouldn't be able to store as much information in their mind if they're going to be outsourcing it to text.
Well, and maybe he was right. I mean, unfortunately, that what you've touched on there is something really, really interesting, because we culturally, our species has about a 7 to 8 month memory. We used to have a lot longer. I think it was like 7 to 8 years, but now people can barely remember what's happened culturally, more than like 7 or 8 months. So it's hard to say, because we live in this age and we're so influenced by a neural network that was created by the age that we live in, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Nikola Tesla, there will never be another Nikola Tesla, because his neural network was created by the age that he lived in, by the experiences that he had. What we can hope for is people letting go of very short, small bits of interaction. So it's very rare. I mean, what we're doing right now is a luxury in this age. People are always saying, you've got 5 minutes, you've got 3 minutes for videos. You can't give people more. I'm like, what happened to the age where we used to sit around and talk for 8 hours? I mean, Terrence McKenna and Alan Watts would do full 3-day lectures. 3 days. And people are like, I can't listen to more than 3 minutes, or I can't listen to more than, a 1 hour podcast. So I don't know. I mean, we are victims of the neural networks that are created by the age we live in. I mean,
I
that's it.
saw Vice made an article about how they were writing articles that would say something you liked is bad, and that they had shaped their audience to only want hate clicks. So basically they were reflecting on, okay, they blamed it on capitalism, but the way I read it was like, so we've been kind of shaping our audience to like go for these hate clicks, like, oh, you like Scooby-Doo, like Scooby-Doo is trash, or like, oh, you
Yeah.
like
Mm-hmm.
Sailor Moon, like it's actually the worst. And then like people are like, oh yeah, like let me read this thing, and like so I can get on the hate. And
Yeah.
now they're trying to be more positive, and people aren't clicking their stuff.
Yeah.
Right? As in, if you're not going aggro, or if you're not pushing that amygdala somehow, it's
Mhm.
like people don't like just optimism for some reason. It's like it's like they need a little bit of flair or spice, like with the optimism.
Well, there used to be other ways of pushing that. Like right now, I'm reading the complete works of Cicero, which I'm probably not going to finish in my lifetime. But it's a very interesting book that I'm just picking bits out of that just I don't know, random, or the titles speak to me. But anyway, reading the complete works of Cicero, you have somebody who, depending on the case that he is being a lawyer on, would employ all of these very beautiful orations. And just reading the guy, every single line that he says is completely inspiring. And that is something, though, that just like there used to be this, I believe, ancient Chinese practice of smelling different flowers in
Mhm.
order to tell them apart, even though a lot of these flowers smell the same. I think that there is a hierarchy of nuance when it comes to human experiences. And my other fear going forward is that if people have the choice of taking the sugary candy as opposed to the apple, more people are going to go for the candy, and the more people go for the candy, the less their taste buds are going to be accustomed to the apple or banana or
Yeah.
something that would have a lot more subtle flavor in it.
This is my top complaint to anyone who's within like 10 feet of me all the time. That and it's partly because of the work that I do, that I don't feel like, I sometimes come away from this work thinking, why the hell am I doing this? I could do anything else that's vacuous and make my life completely different. I could, you know, change the subject matter to talk about something that's controversial all the time, or talk about something that's silly or stupid or hate click, as Jules was talking about. But then I start to realize, you're right. People will gravitate towards that sugary, simplistic way of looking at the world. The reason, and I always forget this, and I always have to bring myself back to base with this. I used to feel this way. I used to feel like um, I wanted to keep things simple. This was in my younger teens. I wanted to keep things simple. I wanted to um, not be a target, really. And so by keeping things simple, my fear was sort of tribal, if that makes sense. There are lots of fearful people out there. There are lots of very fragile people out there. And I think any of the people that are clicking on these hate things, that are addicted to the hate, if you look and you sort of investigate in their lives, you'll find a lot of pain, a lot of fragility, a lot of anger. And it's because, I mean, look, there are a million reasons why, but it always sort of comes back to pain. I I I think people, it's sort of a cliche, but people hurt other people, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we're living in a very, it's so funny that we're bringing this up, because I was just thinking the other day how we live in such a guilt-ridden, pained time period right now. And it's everywhere. It's so obvious. Everyone thinks that they're being clever. Everyone thinks that they're being funny. A couple of days ago, I think it was yesterday, World War III was trending on Twitter.
Hmm.
And everything under that headline was cynical, memes, jokes. Everything was funny. Let me go get my last beer. Let me have my last cake. Let me have my last slice of pizza before the world ends. I'm not going to pay my rent this month. I'm so happy I don't have to pay my, like, it was, and it just shows you these people cannot cope with how serious this is. I don't, and
I
I
think
don't
humor
know.
for some of that stuff can be helpful. I think there's different, I definitely think there's, like, I saw a humor that I really disliked. It was on New York Mag on Instagram, and it was like a old clip from the archives about laughing about the world being underwater. I feel like there are laughs that are kind of like laughing at absurdity. Well, I guess it's hard. I want to distinguish them, but I guess it's all kind of similar when you're laughing at things that make you uncomfortable. It's
Well,
like a
think
coping
of
mechanism for the
Jewish
things that make you
Jewish
uncomfortable.
humor. Like, think of Jewish humor, for instance. The Jews have been persecuted for centuries and centuries, having to live in these isolated areas away from everybody else. It was only, I think, until the 50s that Jews were allowed to go to high-end universities like Harvard.
Mhm.
But they managed to transmute that into humor. So I definitely see that as being a beneficial thing in a lot of circumstances. But what's also interesting for me is whether this creation of the ego that's been going on over time, if that may also have something to do with, are you familiar with Julian James's book, The Origin of Consciousness and the Breakdown of the Bicameral Mind?
Um, it's on my list. I have like 7 or 8 books that I am trying to get to right now. I'm reading The Dark Star Rising, which is really fascinating. It's about chaos magic.
Wow.
Um,
Mm.
really
We have a
scary.
hat with chaos magic on it.
Mm.
But
Yeah.
with Julian Jaynes, from what I understand, the bicameral mind theory goes on to say that during the Bronze Age,
Mhm.
the right hemisphere of the brain gave signals to the left hemisphere that people would have interpreted as if it was the voice of gods that were speaking through them. And you could see, for example, in artwork, going back to the archaic Greeks,
Mhm,
they were
mhm.
portrayed as puppets being moved by the will of the gods. You could also see that in the Iliad. Although the
Yes.
Odyssey, you have Odysseus who has more of a character about him. So what I'm interested in is through this progression of the ego growing, I could also see this isolation, loneliness, and this experimentation, trying things out, because we're not living in these isolated villages anymore where people did have very nice looking clogs and dresses and whatever stuff they created, nor do we, unfortunately, I think, unfortunately, have architectural styles like they used to do back, let's say, during the neoclassical period, based on Greek and Roman styles, where it was, I think, very psychedelic. Like if you're talking about ayahuasca,
Mhm.
DMT, all of these transcendental states, the kind of things that people see there is a combination of, I'd say, mathematics and nature. I mean, it's all nature, but the idea here is that it's very organized as far as how these flowery chakra patterns are growing
Mhm.
and columns, all of these things that I don't think a bunch of hippies would spend their time building, yet we had all these serious dudes that were building all this stuff and making these blueprints. I really see a very important quality there that I also don't want to be lost. And I hope that if we use technology in such a way as to bring it back, we could have maybe another iteration of ancient Rome, like just pick a random city and turn that into Rome with like bat houses and columns and things like that. I think that'd be pretty cool.
Well, it's funny because um, this is what Egypt is based on. I mean, it's not a surprise that every statue that you see in Egypt is actually can be mapped to a part of the body.
Mm-hmm.
The Egyptians were the masters of the body because they were embalming people. They were constantly opening the body and looking at the brainstem, slicing it in different ways. And so a lot of the art and a lot of the sculptures that you see in Egypt that mimics those forms and shapes, it's when you really start to look at it and you understand that the shape of the brainstem is actually the column in a lot of the architecture in Egypt, um, and that the eyes of the
Mm-hmm.
pharaohs were actually the left and right hemisphere of the brain. It just makes sense because if your culture was based around death and dis you know, removing the organs from people's bodies all the time, if you know, our culture is so separate from that, we never even see dead bodies ever. We're not even around them. We don't know what the body looks like inside. But to be in a culture where that's what you do, it makes sense that it would overlap into your art. And you touched on something that's really important here. One of the things that I've been saying, and I've tried to say it on every show that I've been on, is that we moved from being nature to individuals. And through that movement, and there are reasons why we did that, or why that transition happened. The mirror, I think, had a great responsibility in that act. Once we saw ourselves as individuals, that moved us away from being a collective into an individual. And when that happens, you get a fracturing of art, you get a fracturing of culture, you get a fracturing of psychology and philosophy. So it's not a coincidence that we're living in the age of chaos. That's the reason I'm reading this Dark Star Rising, because part of it has to do with chaos magic and how these political figures have come to power, but it also has to do with a fracturing of the human away from nature. So what I've been saying is that, we're not human. We think of ourselves as human, but what we really are is nature. If culture could hear that right now, they would realize that instead of being isolated, because there's an epidemic of isolation right now.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it is, and it's only going to get worse. as we move into as we move into the future where you can put on a pair of glasses and you can just block out the world forever. You don't ever have to deal with anybody ever again. You can turn everybody's face now. Everybody can just be a dragon from now on. In your
and
world.
that's when the meteor strikes. Everybody's plugged in. That's when the meteor strikes, and it all
and nobody
resets.
knows until they get crisped. So what I'm trying to say here is that there are technological reasons for the philosophies in the ages that we find ourselves, and it's really, really important to be able to step away from culture far enough. You still have to observe it to make your extrapolations, but you have to be able to step far enough away from it to be able to see the bigger picture. And the bigger picture is the cosmic picture. The bigger picture is the fact that there is very little difference between us and the cosmos. There's a form factor, there's a design difference, but the essence of the material is the same. The codes, the geometries that we find at the molecular level, there's no difference. The forms that you find in a diamond molecule, you'll find that in a human body. The forms that you find on the planet in our geometries, you find in the Saturn hexagon. The forms that we find in the Fibonacci sequence, we also find throughout the cosmos. So the geometries, the mathematics, the codes, the algorithms, all of those things, even the algorithms that are deeply embedded in our machines now, and that will be embedded in the future in the machines, those algorithms have always been here. Those are cosmic algorithms. We're just, this is one of the things I said at NASA, because my speech was a very naturalistic speech, even though it was about technology. And I actually said all of the things I've said to you here, which is that, we see ourselves as human, but we're actually nature. But one of the things that I talked about at NASA was that that every invention that we're going to invent is already in the room with us. Every code that we need is already here. Our brains are just now evolving to a place where we can discover them. There are no new codes. There are no new algorithms. In a system that is closed, to find yourself emerging within that system, you will only experience what the system has in store for you. You will only experience what the system has from the original point of origin.
It sounds very similar to Plato's theory of forms a little.
Are you talking about the Platonic solids, or what do you?
How ideas are more real than what we see. So the idea of a triangle is a true triangle, and if I were to draw a triangle,
get you. Yeah.
That's not its true form. It's an idea of a triangle.
Well, what's interesting about that to me is that since I've been doing a lot of meditation the past couple of years, the theory of forms that Plato talks about, it's very similar to things that I've experienced in that state when there's no light. I've talked before on the show about the experiences that I've had in meditative states, but it's very interesting how much potential our mind's eye has to experience the exact same cosmic things you were talking about. The idea of there being, let's say, a third eye, as they talk about in yoga class, there is, according at least to my experience, a shining ray of light in the exact center of your eye line that can be activated. It can take the form of a triangle, a DNA helix, a 5-pointed star, all of these very perfect looking symbols. So when, let's say, we have someone like Francis Crick, who talked about visualizing the DNA helix, I can definitely see how this is an integral part of our human system that we just don't use. It feels
It's
sometimes
been forgotten
like
a little.
Yeah, it feels like we're an airplane that's on the tarmac just going in circles, not knowing that it can fly out of there.
I love the idea of how we are nature, and how sometimes people think of humans as like separate from nature, and even veterinarians, like, and doctors, like, it used to be the same role, right? Like I think people sometimes think animals don't have emotions like people do. Like, oh, my cat or my dog can't be happy or sad. It can't have human emotions, and it's completely wrong, right? And I think there's emotional intelligence that can be stunted in society through things like pain and trauma. And I think there is I I like what you said, how culture is not really our friend, and how culture can I think culture is a beast in a sense. I think culture's a beast. And I think that if there are these spiritually malnourished areas in our society, there's not only, I mean, I think one easy thing to talk about would just say, the importance of religions in the past, and thought technologies that really focus on self-healing and positivity, and but not like reckless optimism. Like, you want to be you want to embrace the stresses of life in a way that makes you stronger without cynical. It's tough. It's tough because there's, you can isolate yourself from the dark corners of society, and you can like be like Matthew McConaughey and True Detective, and just like walk right into the bar, and it's like,
it's so funny you bring up that show. I have quoted that show so many times. I thought that was a brilliant season, the first season.
I love that show.
His some of his monologues were groundbreaking. Truly, time is a flat circle. Like, I was sitting there going, holy shit, like that is so true. It's so true. It's so right. It just, I mean, could we ever prove it? I don't know, but
it's very now. I'm still wrapping my head around the current time.
Well, I mean, it's, you said something like, you felt like culture was a beast, and there's something important in that statement, because beasts present themselves as beastly for specific reasons at certain times. They're not always, right? So a wolf is not always a hunter. A lion is not always a killer. A bear is not always a killer. Sometimes it is a caretaker. It is a scavenger for its children. So I do agree with you, and if you're framing it that way, that culture can sometimes be a wild animal backed into a corner, and you have to be very careful in those moments. We're in that moment right now, and technology has a lot to do with that. Part of it is maybe because some of these technologies originally started as good intentions, and for economic reasons and for psychological reasons, the people running those things have just steered it right off the cliff. And now we end up, as you said, being milked. We psychically, I mean, literally, that's what's happening to us. That's why I keep using that reference, that culture, from Terrence, that culture is not your friend. It's not there to be your friend. It's there to, for its own purposes. We don't really even know what that purpose is yet. I always keep saying to people, especially in the techno-philosophy field, digital philosophers, you have to, part of your responsibility is to bring the question, one of the most important questions, bring that question to the surface with people. And that question is, what is technology and what does it want from us? And it's a strange question, because when you say it to people in that way, when you frame it that way, you're giving it animus qualities. You're giving it an animist sort of point of view, saying, well, technology has an intention, technology has a voice, technology has reason, technology has consciousness. None of those things can be proven right now. But what can be proven, and very readily proven, because it's something that anybody watching this is going to experience tangibly in the moment, is that what we are doing right now is digitizing our voices and our images. That is traveling through the air to someone else's neural network, and they are absorbing it. That can be proven because it's happening.
It's trippy. It's trippy when you think about it.
It's crazy. It is literally magic. And people don't like when I say that because, oh God, you wouldn't. I mean, any academic, the closer you get to the academic world, saying that word magic just like shuts them down.
Though I'd imagine that's still, maybe that's like the Mount Stupid, and the more you keep going, the more there are going to be people at the highest echelons who are actually very open to those.
Well, they're not just open; they're using it. They're using magic.
Yeah, like
that's a fact.
Take JPL, Jet Propulsion Labs, with the guy who was Aleister Crowley's best disciple, Jack Parsons. That guy was all about the sex magic.
You guys really have to read Dark Star Rising. He, the author, goes through connection after connection after connection of Aleister Crowley's history, his proteges, and the people that have risen to power in corporations and politics that publicly have said that they follow these people. It's really interesting. So
interesting.
Yeah, it's really, really interesting. I think there are a lot more people that realize how magical this time period is that we're in right now, and they're taking advantage of it, because on the surface they appear logical, they appear commercial, if that makes sense, but on the inside, behind closed doors, there is magic happening. And I don't mean the cliche magic. I mean using the right phrases at the right moment, saying certain things in a certain way, projecting a specific image at a certain time culturally, greenlighting a certain movie with certain stars in certain roles. This is how you move culture. And this is what I keep saying about culture not being your friend. A lot of people don't know that that stuff is happening in the background. So when they go to a movie like Terminator, they think, oh, this is just a really entertaining science fiction film. But there's a lot of stuff that's been going on in the background before that movie ever made it to the theater. A lot of research, a lot of people's hands have been in those movies. I mean, I don't want to pick on Terminator, but it's just one of the most obvious because we always talk about that. It always gets brought up. But it's everywhere. It's in music, it's in fashion, it's in books, it's on television, it's in podcasts, it's everywhere. I'm becoming much more aware of it. I don't know how, and maybe you guys have seen this in your own lives. I don't know how I knew to use the words that I've used the way that I've used them, but the more, and I think Terrence and Alan Watts were both very aware. I think any philosopher, any polished public speaking philosopher knows at a certain stage, they reach a stage where they realize what's happening. And I got to that stage a couple of years ago where I started to realize through my research and reading all of these obscure occultist books that I was doing this instinctively. Some of these things I was doing instinctively, and that it was having, and I could see the cause and effect. And so I think it's also important for people to realize that we are dealing with people who have a lineage of magical influences, if that makes sense. And this is not a subject that you can take to the public all the time. And there's certain places that you can't take this because those people, there are certain audiences that are just not going to understand that. A business audience is not going to understand that conversation. I made that mistake when I was at the London Business School. I was speaking at the London Business School, and I said the unthinkable. We were doing question and answer with the press off in a side room after I had given my speech. And two things happened. The first thing was after and my speech was on digitization of humanity. That's basically what my speech was about. It was that we are becoming a digitized species. That was the whole thing. And you can imagine, I mean, that's a pretty far stretch for the London Business School. I gave my speech, and as I came off the stage and I sat down, there were about 2 seats down. There was a guy who said, and I heard him clearly, "Wow, that guy's really out there." And I thought to myself, I didn't even give you my A game. I gave you my C game light. I barely gave you my C game. So we go off and we're starting to have question and answer, and someone said something about the economy and how this digitization thing would affect the economy, and I said, you're assuming that we're going to have money in the future. And it was like I had thrown a bomb into the audience. Like, they could not believe that I could say this.
This was England, so their monocles popped out.
Yeah, exactly. What? And, so, yeah. And they were just shocked that a futurist would come there in front of them and how dare I say there may not be money may not exist in the future, because they have such a very narrow scope of cultural history. Money has not always been with us. That's a very shallow period of time in our evolution.
Well, there's been an evolution to money, like starting with barter,
Yeah.
and then whether it's seashells and other things.
But even that's shallow, because in the beginning, if somebody wanted something, they would just
crypto
bash you
would be
over the
money.
head.
Crypto would be money, wouldn't it? Because, who knows what it's going to be in 10,000 years? I mean, who knows what it's going to look like? But for me, like I try to think at least in terms of like a couple of 100 years, like in terms of like, what do I think the next 100 or 200 years are going to be? I think money's going to be around. Like, if I was going to make a bet, I was like, in 200 years, I think we're still going to have money of some kind of something to aid with the fluidity of transactions, because I think there'll always be scarcity on some scale. Like, there, like, certain things that are considered scarce now might not be, but for the things, just like, even if you want to, like, if you want to have your own planet, or if you want to, you there's a certain person you want to see speak and only a certain number of people can be in the front row, there's still going to be things where, okay, yeah, sure, they could digitally stream it, or they could they could hang out there through virtual reality. People will still want certain experiences, and there'll be spaces that not everyone can be in at the same time. And like, these are instances that I think will always be aided with a money system.
But
so
what you're talking about is scarcity of experience. And
sure,
scarcity of experience is something I understand the way you're describing that, but my extrapolation is that that if the experience is so real that you can't tell the difference, which is where we're headed, then how could you tell the difference? So scarcity of experience means that being in the front row versus watching it on television, that's a scarcity of experience, right? There's a difference between those two. There's only 12 seats, let's say, in the front row. But if there is no tangible way to tell whether you're in that front row, and that's where we're headed, where you literally, from haptic feedback to brain computer interface, where I'm not speaking to you on a visual spectrum, I'm speaking to you through your neurons. So the experience itself cannot be tangibly separated, so you wouldn't know in the future. So I guess all I'm saying is that
the value of money, I think, will definitely change, and who knows?
Well, maybe this is going to push things a little bit too far. Gray, you be the judge here, but maybe we could get to a point where we're not even going to have to, let's say, fool people with having their neurons display something, but we'd be able to figure out what this is all about and be able to just go wherever we want to go in terms of the actual physical space that we've all known, loved, and grown up with for generations. Where this space, we take it to be so solid, and I still need to get much deeper into biology, but from what I understand, everything's vibrating, everything's going in and out of existence. So
Yep.
I don't think that the limit would necessarily be in things that would have to be put on us or put in us.
Well, I guess that's what I'm saying about scarcity of experience. I don't think there is going to be scarcity of experience in the future. So what Jules is describing is a limit of spatial presence, I guess is the way to describe it. And if you can live in a world where I can call up any performer in my mind or in my hollow deck sort of thing that we're creating in the future, virtual reality space in the future or simulation in the future, where I can't tell the difference whether that's real or not, then there's no reason for me to want to go sit in the front row because I have my own front row. I can create my own experience where now you can say, and here's where I agree with you. You can say, okay, in reality, there's 12 seats in that front row. And if I am dead set on being one of those 12 people, okay, that I agree. But that's going to be such a shallow amount of people that I don't think you can run an economic system on that sort of small scale. I mean, you might have, I guess when I was saying that at the London Business School, I was thinking in my mind, the paper representation that we have for exchanging energy, which we call money, to me, that's not going to exist in the future. Definitely, it won't be paper. That's just ridiculous. It will probably be a digital asset, and that digital asset will be so fluid that we won't think of it as money anymore. It will just be something that moves in the background the way electricity moves in the background, and we don't notice it. So we understand money now because we count it, we hold it, we exchange it, we see it, we crave it, people flaunt it. It has a agreed upon value right now, right? Mm-hmm. So we know there's an average to what things cost right now, regionally, I guess locally too. So you can say to someone, give me a cup of coffee, right? Well, we know that that's going to be a certain amount of money, $2 to $5, right? Depending on where you live. That probably sounds like a lot of money in the Midwest or something, but in New York City, like $7 for a cup of coffee is that average? I think that's average.
No, wait, that's average.
That's my gourmet place that I go to. Depends on where you're at. I mean, literally in New York, I think we understand what certain averages are for certain things, right? So a one-bedroom apartment in New York, let's say $1,800. That's let's say that's average.
Not in Manhattan, probably.
That's a lot of money in Ohio. That's a lot of money, and that value doesn't match. So already you're seeing that system is fragile. So I guess what I'm saying is that there won't be that kind of paper economic money system in the future. I think there's probably going to be a digital asset system that is hopefully, I'm not going to say Bitcoin, but or blockchain, but something that looks like that system running in the background that we don't even really pay attention to. Why would we? Why would we bother if I can create any world or any experience that I want? Why would I want to go out and buy a super expensive house or a super expensive car?
Well, just like with something like breast implants, where in the 90s they looked all weird and now they're looking a lot better. I think same thing is going to happen with this kind of technology, where in the beginning, I think it may be worth it for a lot of people to get that beachfront property because they'd be able to smell the air and experience things with their five senses that they may not necessarily be able to experience with a device, regardless of how sophisticated it may be, maybe up to a point. Maybe there's going to be this point we'll reach where that beachfront property is going to be the same if you plug yourself in or if you buy it here in this world. But it's still difficult for me to imagine how that's going to look, but that's because we've never experienced it yet.
People are sentimental too. Like, there's a reason why people would bid on an article of clothing Michael Jackson wore on tour or something, and why you can go to Planet Hollywood and they have memorabilia behind glass and things like that. Like you could make a replica, and if people know if you put a replica of memorabilia on eBay and you're like, this is the piece of memorabilia from your favorite scene or concert, like the values are, it's intangible to people, right? So you're 100% right in terms of, like, if you can eliminate scarcity, you can probably work to eliminate scarcity like asymptotically, like where you're infinitely approaching zero, but you never quite get to zero. Like I think that's also maybe an exaggeration. I really do think some people in the anti-scarcity movements, like the luxury communism, like the automated luxury communism movement.
Shout out BJ Murphy.
I love BJ Murphy. I do think some people underestimate the role of scarcity and how it's not always a bad thing. I think we should focus on increasing value, and that the more value that is in society, like if you have less people tattooing their faces and like drinking NyQuil, and like more people, like just, whether you're uplifting someone or you're making a widget or you're doing woodwork or you're coding or like whatever it is that you're helping, like society is like a hive that's like constantly building progress, right? And it's either evolving or devolving, right? And if it seems like parts of our society are devolving, like I think that's a value error, right? Like sometimes our values aren't always in order. Like people can be self-destructive, people can have like negative impacts on others, and people can suffer from emotional hangovers, and or they can be just confined by the like their own economic situation or the people around them too. Like sometimes just the people you're around can be determinative of your internal narrative and like how you walk through life. And I think some people look for scapegoats to like blame like the big injustices, and like sometimes it seems like, oh, if only there wasn't money, or if only like everyone could have a yacht or something, then we would never have to deal with like envy and jealousy, when I feel like some of those are like almost spiritual errors and symptomatic of certain things that are being neglected, that it really is up to each other to focus on and heal and rectify, and to not just pass it off to like the government and like hope like all these things that disturb us and all these people that have been damaged by society, like we need the government to like put them in a room or something and like take care of them. And I just think that's a very disturbing way to think about those kinds of problems and solutions, when really it's like, I think people have to come together, or we could be living in China and you could be like thrown in prison and have your organs harvested if they don't like your beliefs or what you're saying online.
Well, and that may be where we're headed. I mean, there's a reason why there are still dictators on the planet. It's because they kill anybody who disagrees with them. And so, and their disagreement is variable. I mean, it changes from moment to moment. It's not always based on logic. And so, I absolutely understand what you're saying, and I agree with using the yacht as a great example, because or you could use houses, right? There's this huge, and there have been this huge movement away from the McMansion sort of huge estate houses. And everybody knows that the last 10 years, the small house, tiny house movement was big. And that was something that was being seen in the 60s. People were making extrapolations. Alvin Toffler did this too. In the late 60s and late 70s, you could see that nuclear family, where the white picket fence just wasn't working for people. And so that's why you had communes popping up everywhere in the United States. It's why you had people who were going off grid. And so the yacht is a great example too, because First of all, no one really wants a yacht, and
I'm sure
no,
some
no, no,
people.
no. Listen, I'm gonna walk you through my logic here. No one really wants the yacht. It's not the yacht that they want. They want the experience. They want the power of being able to have the yacht. But anybody who's ever had a yacht, they hate. I don't know if I can use horrible language on your show, but
Yes, you can.
okay. They usually end up fucking hating these beasts, these machines, because it is absurdly expensive. If you just knew how much the gas for one trip on a yacht was, it would blow your mind. Then you're talking about the maintenance, the upkeep, the insurance. So by the time you have that experience, all of that, the thing that you thought you wanted when you wanted the yacht has evaporated, and all you have left is the burden of having that yacht. And so I guess what I'm saying is,
Some people think of kids that way, though. Some people think of like
oh yeah, I'm
having
sure
like
yeah.
raising kids is like a burden, you
Oh
know?
well,
And
after the
so
luster is worn off of like, oh, they're not cute anymore. They're actually talking back, and like they're crashing my car and like burning my house down. Like they're not fucking cute anymore. So I guess what I'm saying to you is there's no way to eradicate the desire. The desire in human nature is, if you go back to the Buddhist idea, desire is the cause of all suffering. There's no way to eradicate everyone from wanting a yacht, okay? But I guarantee you that anybody who has that experience will tell you afterwards that is not what they wanted. It's not the yacht, it's not the object. It's the thing around it, it's the experience, it's the ability to have it. And once that's worn off, then they move on to something else. This is basic human nature. And so there are only so many, I don't know what the word is. There's only so many peak experiences that you can have and own. And once people have that, and once they experience it, once that luster is worn off. And I think this is why the story of Buddha is so interesting, because if you know the arc of Buddha's journey was leaving luxury, leaving the palace, leaving the wealth behind, and going towards eradicating desire.
And
And
also
so,
leaving the self-flagellation behind as well. He tried to go down the path of, you know, not eating a lot and just turning himself into a skeleton. And eventually he found that that's not the right way either, because there is
yeah,
a bit of egoism in that striving too.
look how I'm suffering. Aren't I? Yeah, yeah. It's the martyr syndrome too. But I mean, I guess what I'm saying, to your point about the yacht is I think it's a mistake for there's a certain futuristic movement for, the luxury space, gay communism, whatever, and that idea that everything can be automated, and everybody can have a yacht, and everybody can have a mansion, and well, not everybody wants that stuff. And so, but you can't fault people for mistaking those desires and and wanting to have those experiences. It's usually people who have never had access to those experiences. So if you have a malnourishment of experience too, that's a part of the problem that we may be facing in the future, where actually you're starting to see it now. I mean, YouTubers, right? YouTube is a perfect example of an average person who comes from a average family, middle class, and suddenly they start a YouTube channel and they're making $600,000 a month. Okay, if you look at how they behave, the Lamborghinis, the buying the mansions, and there are lots of examples of YouTubers that are doing this right now. It's happening to them in real time. They don't even know it. It's happening to them right now. They're in their arc of peak experience, trying to figure out like how to satiate that desire that they've had, because they didn't come from that world, and so they want to be in that experience. But that's not. I'm trusting that my observations are accurate here, that because it's happened to me. That is not what you're after. And it takes people a long time to figure out that really what they're after. And this, I'm saying this, this is the story of our culture, that we're not after power. That power, if you've ever had it, is a horrible experience. It is heavy. It is weighted in a way that I don't think a lot of people can even handle. That's why you see people overdose. That's why you see a lot of people who get into power who commit suicide. You see a lot of people who, because they did not expect the weight of that experience. And so the positive part of my extrapolation on that aspect of the future is that once we are able to simulate those things, I think it's going to help people work through their yacht experience or their mansion experience or their power experience or whatever it is. They're going to be able to work through that in a simulation because it's going to be so real that going into that space where you can be a superstar for a day or a month or however long you want to be in that space, or you can have the perfect body, or you can have the yacht, or you can have the ability to blow up the world, or whatever your kick is, whatever your juice is, you can have that in this future simulated space. I mean, I'm not advocating for this. I'm just saying, and I want to make that actually, this is a really important thing to say here, overall for futurists. Futurists are often, we're often blamed for bringing the message about where things are headed. I'm not advocating for anything unless I say this is what I support. I'm just telling you that this looks like where we're headed. It looks like, from all of the evidence, that we're headed towards simulating, digitizing, and crunching, and making all of those experiences hyper realistic. And whether that is inside the brain with brain computer interface systems, or whether that is topically through virtual reality, however that plays out, this is going to give people the ability to go on those journeys internally before they have to make the mistakes externally.
It's
And
almost
you're probably going to see, and this is what is in the Aftershock book. This is part of what I wrote about in the Aftershock book that's out. You're going to see people creating apps that satiate specific things for specific people, and it's very sensitive to talk about this because we're going through the Me Too movement. I don't know how culture is going to react to rape simulations in the future. We know that those are going to exist. We already have video games that simulate all sorts of horrific things. All of those kinks and all of those taboos, there is going to be a space for people to be in that world. If that is damaging to people or if it's positive for people, I don't know yet. I'm probably both, but to ignore that that's coming is a mistake. I keep saying it's going to be as bright as it is dark. So
there was this Twilight Zone episode where this gambler went into what he thought was heaven, where he got to have all the girls he ever wanted, gamble as much as he liked, and he always won. And eventually he figured out that this wasn't heaven, this was hell. So I do see this as potentially being if, for example, and I have no evidence of this, but if, for example, our embodied consciousness does not just happen once, but it is a series of, let's say, reincarnations, then this would be a fast forwarding of all of these processes where we would get to experience in one lifetime various ways of being so that we can move on to something else. And as far as what that something else is, I'm a big fan of Kabbalah, and I'm slowly but surely learning more about it. The basic gist of it that I got was that if we transmute our egoism into altruism, if we start giving, then we're going to turn that sense of giving into a sense of giving for the sake of giving, instead of a giving for receiving, which some of the Kabbalists talk about as being something that we do even when we profess to love somebody. When we do something for our kids or our loved ones, we're still getting something out of it, and it's something that's a part of nature. But the idea here is to step up to a higher part of nature, where they say that would be the state, whether or not there is a creator, I don't know, but they say that that would be the state of creator, a state of all giving without wanting anything in return.
Well, you touched on something that is at the base of what our conversation has been about. The idea that we are nature, nature is very competitive, but it's also cooperative. It has to be. So I've been also reading. There's a book called The Secret Life of Trees, Secret Lives of Trees, something like that. Anyway, it's all about the forests and the soil and how the microbial fungi communicates with the different trees and how it moves energy and nutrients around. And some of the things that I discovered in this book were absolutely counterintuitive. Like, I always assumed that really large trees were greedy and that really large trees were absorbed, because that's what we're told all the time when we people talk about nature. And it sort of, from an observational point of view, when you look at a forest and you see a big tree, you think, well, that's the winner, right? That's the one that's winning. But in fact, what they found is that the larger trees can consider themselves mother trees. And so it's not that they're winning or that they're taking all of the nutrients. The mother trees actually feed the other trees through the mushroom mycelium that's under the soil. The mushrooms exchange those sugars between the trees. So in times of drought or in times of, let's say, forest fires, or when a specific predator, a beetle or whatever, is coming and feeding on the trees, there are signals that move between those trees, and the mother trees send out the nutrients to the smaller ones. So that's so counterintuitive. You think of a forest as being this ultimate competitive ecosystem, and then you find out that what's happening under, they call it the wood wide web, that what's happening under the surface is an exchange of energy and nutrients. And so I don't think you can ever stop the trees from competing to reach the sun, right? Because that's when you grow a forest, that's what's happening. And I don't think that you can stop humans from desiring whatever it is they desire. You could just fill in the blank. That I agree with as far as an economic structure for human behavior. But what I do think we're starting to learn through this connectivity, through having, a smart computer in our pockets all the time, is the more that we exchange nutrient, in this case, what we're doing right now is exchanging intellectual nutrient. The more that we exchange that intellectual nutrient, the better the entire system becomes. And so I keep saying to people, if you understand how a forest works, you will understand what the future is going to look like. And I said that I did a project with AT&T, and I said that exact thing on camera with them. And that's one of the things that they really responded to when they came up to me after we finished filming. And I think that resonates with people because there is a sense of cooperation built into our bodies, built into our brains, built into our, it has to be, because that we are nature, and nature, the source, literally the source is cooperative. So, we have to be careful when we frame our narratives, around the future, where we say, well, everyone out for their own selves. I'm going to do what I want to do. You go do what you want to do. Well, the system quickly can fall apart when that happens. If nature operated that way, then you would see forests collapsing pretty quickly. I don't know. Everyone has their own theory about how culture is going to move in the future, but what the signals are, let's say that the signals are that we are going to go through a very painful, chaotic, isolated time period, which is what we're sort of at the beginning of it now. And I think it's gonna get a lot worse, and then we're gonna sort of figure this out. That the more we isolate ourselves, the more the weaker we are. I mean, that's a parable that you hear all the time. But the more fractured we become, the weaker our species is going to be. The fear here is, if you follow if you follow the extrapolation of the virtual reality, mirror world, simulated space, how does that bring us closer together? That's the real question. And I guess I want to wrap it up on that question, and really let your viewers and your listeners think on that question. How in the future, if we are able to create any reality that we want to, and we don't have to deal with the real anymore. I tweeted out the other day that this last decade was the last decade of shared reality, that this new decade would be the decade of simulated truth and fractured reality. And if that is true, if that's my extrapolation, if that is true, that that's where we're headed, how do we survive that? How do we become closer to each other when we can just go into a world and never see anyone again? I guess that's my question to end on. So anyway, thank you guys for having me.
Great. Thank you so much. This has been awesome.
Yeah,
This
it's
is so
cool to talk to
inspiring.
you. So great
Yeah.
talking to you.